The Xylos, 7 interspecies research station, hung at the edge of known space like a delicate pendant, its elegant architecture belying its scientific purpose. Nestled in orbit around a small, verdant moon, the station was primarily dedicated to studying the unique plant ecosystem below, which contained botanical species with remarkable medicinal properties. The station operated under the auspices of a multi-species scientific consortium staffed primarily by Kthar scientists, a reptilian species that prized logic and rational thought above all else, and Florian specialists, a plant-based sentient species that communicated through spore emissions and possessed remarkable insights into botanical genetics, though they were physically vulnerable by nature. Into this carefully ordered scientific environment came Dr. Eris Thorne, the station's sole human and its newly appointed medical officer. His recruitment had been a practical decision, rather than one of prestige. Humans possessed a unique immunity to several of the local plant toxins that affected other species, making them ideal medical practitioners in this particular corner of space. More importantly, human medical officers commanded lower salaries than specialists from more technologically advanced species, a fact not lost on the consortium's budget committee. Dr. Thorne arrived with minimal fanfare. A slender man of average height, with close-cropped dark hair peppered with gray at the temples. His movements were precise and economical, his demeanor reserved to the point of seeming detached. He spoke little during his orientation, merely nodding as Station Administrator Kelvash, a senior Kthar scientist, explained the station's protocols and hierarchy. Your medical bay is located on level 3, Kelvash said, his scaled face remaining impassive as his vertical pupils studied Thorne's reaction. It has been stocked according to standard Federation guidelines, though I must note that our expectations regarding treatment methodologies are perhaps more advanced than what you may be accustomed to. Our staff predominantly uses biological energy manipulation and genetic recalibration for most ailments. Thorne merely nodded. I'll familiarize myself with the equipment and make any necessary requisitions. The Kthar scientists quickly developed a dismissive attitude toward the human medic. In their weekly staff meetings, Dr. Thorne's medical reports were treated as an afterthought, sometimes even openly critiqued. Your treatment of Science Officer Pelmar's respiratory inflammation was rudimentary at best, remarked Chief Researcher Sevikor during one such meeting, 3 weeks after Thorne's arrival. Merely suppressing the symptoms with antihistamine compounds rather than recoding the affected cellular responses seems primitive. Thorne, seated at the far end of the conference table, maintained his professional composure. The treatment was effective and allowed Officer Pelmar to return to duty within 4 hours. Sometimes the simplest solution is the most efficient. The Florians, for their part, found the humans' presence disquieting. Their communication through spore emissions allowed them to sense emotional states and biochemical changes in other beings. Dr. Thorne registered to them as unusually controlled, his emotional patterns disciplined to the point of seeming artificial. In their spore speech, they refer to him as the Still One, a reference not merely to his calm demeanor, but to the unnatural steadiness of his biochemical signatures. Chief Florian botanist Florix once observed to his colleagues, he maintains homeostasis even in situations of stress. It is not natural. Even Kthars show biochemical fluctuations when startled. What the station's personnel did notice, but largely dismissed, were the small oddities about the human medic. There are the old scars on his hands and forearms, visible only when he rolled up his sleeves to wash them, which he never explained and carefully kept covered with his uniform's long sleeves. There was his strict physical exercise regimen, conducted during his off hours in his quarters, which the Kthar scientists considered an inefficient expenditure of energy. And there was his personal medical kit, a compact, reinforced case he carried everywhere, organized with military precision and containing several items that appeared oddly antiquated, yet were maintained in perfect condition. Redundancy was his only explanation when Administrator Kelvash questioned the necessity of carrying personal medical tools when the station's systems could synthesize whatever was needed on demand. In emergency medicine, seconds matter. I prefer having essential tools at hand. 6 months into Dr. Thorne's tenure, the station received scattered reports of Zgok pirate activity in the sector. The Zgok, an insectoid species known for their aggressive raiding tactics and ruthless efficiency, typically targeted underdefended outposts for quick strikes, stealing valuable research, technology, and sometimes capturing personnel for ransom. Their chitinous exoskeletons and hive-mind tactical coordination made them formidable opponents. When these reports were raised during a staff meeting, Administrator Kelvash dismissed them with a flick of his scaled hand. The statistical probability of Zgok raiders targeting a research station with no significant military or commercial value is negligible. Our automated defense systems are more than adequate for standard security protocols. Dr. Thorne, who had been scrolling through the report data on his tablet, looked up. I would recommend increasing medical supply stockpiles as a precaution, particularly coagulants and broad-spectrum antibiotics. This suggestion earned him dismissive glances from the Kthar staff. Your species' predilection for worst-case scenario preparation is noted, Dr. Thorne, said Kelvash, but unnecessary in this instance. We operate based on probability, not paranoia. Thorne didn't argue the point, merely making a notation on his tablet before returning to his characteristically attentive silence. That evening, Security Officer Trazke, a junior Kthar, observed Dr. Thorne through the station's monitoring system as he reorganized the medical bay. The human methodically checked emergency equipment, verified the functionality of the bay's isolation protocols, and updated the station's medical database with additional cross-species trauma protocols. Trazke filed this behavior under human behavioral anomalies in his personal research notes, but took no further action. The warning klaxons began shrieking at 0317 station standard time, jolting personnel from their sleep cycles. The automated announcement echoed through the corridors in multiple languages. Proximity alert. Unidentified vessel breaching outer defense perimeter. All personnel implement emergency protocol Zenith 3. In the central command hub, chaos erupted as bleary-eyed Kthar officers attempted to assess the situation. The main view screen displayed a sleek, predatory vessel of unmistakable Zgok design cutting through space toward the station, already past the outer sensor ring. How did they penetrate the early warning system? Demanded Administrator Kelvash, his normally measured voice rising an octave. Run diagnostics on the defense grid. Activate all security protocols. The Florian staff members present were already emanating distress spores, filling the air with a faint mist that carried their fear pheromones. Several of the plant-based beings had begun to curl their leaf-like appendages inward, a defensive posture reflecting their intense anxiety. In the medical bay, Dr. Thorne awakened instantly at the first note of the alarm. He sat up in the small cot he kept in his office, reached for the chronometer, then swung his feet to the floor. His movements were unhurried, yet purposeful as he pulled on his white medical uniform, secured his personal kit to his belt, and tapped the communication panel. Medical bay to command. Status report requested. The voice that responded was that of Science Officer Pelmar, high and strained. Zgok Vesel approaching. Estimated boarding attempt in 15 minutes. Defense systems showing multiple failures. Acknowledged, Thorne replied, his voice level. Implementing medical emergency protocols. Advise all personnel, if wounded, apply manual pressure to injuries and seek shelter in secure areas. Medical priority zones are being established in Laboratories 2 and 5. Thorne out. He tapped another sequence into the panel, activating the medical bay's lockdown procedures. Reinforced shutters slid over the windows, and the main door sealed with a pneumatic hiss. Thorne moved to the central supply cabinet, entering his access code and beginning to fill a reinforced medical backpack with critical supplies. The first explosion rocked the station 12 minutes later, far sooner than command had predicted. The Zgok had deployed boarding craft with explosive charges rather than attempting to dock. The station's artificial gravity flickered momentarily as emergency systems compensated. Thorne secured the last of his supplies, and tapped his communication device. "This is Dr. Thorne. All personnel in the Eastern Quadrant, proceed immediately to Laboratory 5. Use maintenance shafts where possible. Avoid main corridors." Through the station's internal monitoring system, Thorne observed the first wave of Zgok boarders entering through a breach in the docking area. Their armored exoskeletons gleamed dully under the emergency lighting, their compound eyes scanning for targets as they moved with unsettling coordination. Each carried energy weapons that hummed with lethal potential. As Thorne exited the medical bay, he encountered a group of terrified junior researchers, two Kthar and a Florian, huddled in the corridor. "The main passage to Laboratory 5 is blocked," one of the Kthar explained, voice trembling despite the species' usual composure. "We detected Zgok biosignatures approaching from the East Junction." Thor nodded, immediately altering his mental map of the station. "Follow me. We'll use the maintenance access behind a protein synthesis lab." As they moved, Thorne gave rapid, clear instructions. "When we reach the next junction, we'll create a temporary barrier. Drag the storage lockers across the corridor entrance. They won't stop the Zgok for long, but they'll slow them down." The junior researchers looked at him with confusion. "We should simply run," said the second Kthar. "Logical probability favors." "We're not calculating probabilities now," Thorne cut in, his voice suddenly carrying an unmistakable note of command. "We're surviving. Move the lockers when I tell you to." Something in his tone silenced any further objections. When they reached the junction, the researchers followed his instructions, dragging heavy storage units across the corridor entrance while Thorne accessed a nearby medical emergency station. He quickly examined its contents, selecting an asthma inhaler containing a high-dose bronchodilator. "Keep moving toward the lab," he ordered the researchers. "I'll be right behind you." As the researchers hurried away, Thorne modified the inhaler with quick, practiced movements, overriding its safety protocols and maximizing its dispersal capacity. When the first Zgok scout rounded the corner, its mandibles clicking in anticipation, Thorne activated the device and tossed it toward the insectoid raider. The inhaler discharged its entire contents in a pressurized cloud. The powerful bronchiolator, harmless to most humanoid species in small doses, acted as a potent neurotoxin to the Zgok's unique respiratory system. The raider stumbled, its coordinated movements becoming jerky as it struggled to maintain neural function through the chemical fog. Thorne was already moving, catching up with the researchers and guiding them through the maintenance access shaft. Behind them, they heard the clatter of more Zgok warriors arriving, followed by angry chittering as they discovered their affected comrade. In Laboratory 5, a group of senior researchers had established a makeshift safe zone. The heavy blast doors were designed to contain potentially hazardous experimental materials and provided temporary security against the invaders. Dr. Thorne quickly assessed the situation, noting approximately 20 personnel, a mix of Kthar and Florian scientists, huddled in small groups, many showing signs of shock. "Has anyone been injured?" he asked, already moving among them with scanner in hand. Two Florians suffered lacerations from shattered equipment during the initial explosion, reported senior researcher Vix Tao. "They are in the environmental chamber, where humidity levels have been increased to stabilize their condition." Thor nodded, heading directly to the chamber. Inside, he found two Florians, their vegetable matter showing signs of trauma, torn leaf-like appendages and seeping fluid from their fibrous trunks. He worked quickly, applying synthetic sealant to their wounds and administering a specialized nutrient solution to prevent shock. As he worked, the laboratory's communication system crackled to life with Administrator Kelvash's voice. "All personnel, Zgok boarders have breached security on levels 2 through 4. Station security systems have been compromised. Seek shelter and await further instructions." The message cut off abruptly, replaced by static. Thorne finished treating the Florians and returned to the main laboratory area. "We need to establish a more defensible position," he stated, surveying the room with a tactical eye that seemed oddly out of place in a medical officer. "Move all heavy equipment to create a perimeter around the central processing area." Secure all hazardous materials in containment. On whose authority are you issuing these orders? Demanded Vixtal, the Kthar's facial scales flushing with indignation. You are a medical officer, not security personnel. Thorn met the Kthar's gaze with unnerving steadiness. On the authority of being the only person in this room with experience in this type of situation. You could debate my qualifications after we survive. Before Vixtal could respond, a security alert flashed on the laboratory's monitoring system. Zgok's signatures were detected outside the maintenance shaft they had used to reach the lab. They've tracked our path, Thorn stated, turning to the small group of terrified researchers. They'll breach that access point within minutes. Moving to the laboratory's equipment storage, Thorn quickly located a portable defibrillator. With practiced efficiency, he opened its casing and reconfigured its power settings, modulating the output to a specific frequency. When the first Zgok warrior forced its way through the maintenance shaft into the laboratory minutes later, Thorn was waiting. As the insectoid emerged, mandibles clicking and compound eyes scanning the room, Thorn activated the modified defibrillator at close range. The device emitted a targeted electromagnetic pulse that temporarily disrupted the neural patterns in the Zgok's central nervous system. The raider collapsed, its limbs twitching uncontrollably. Thorn quickly dragged the incapacitated Zgok into a storage closet, securing the door with a heavy equipment cart. Returning to the main area, he found the Kthar scientists staring at him in shocked silence. "How did you?" began Vixtal, but was interrupted as the laboratory's main door groaned under the impact of something heavy. "They're attempting to breach the main entrance," Thorn announced, already moving toward the laboratory's central research station. "Everyone into the inner chamber, now." As the researchers scrambled to comply, Thorn accessed the laboratory's automated security system. A Zgok hacking device had been attached to the external control panel, attempting to override the door's locking mechanism. Thorn extracted a laser scalpel from his medical kit, calibrated it to its highest setting, and approached the door. With surgical precision, he created a small opening in the door panel, just large enough to insert the scalpel. On the other side, he could see the Zgok device pulsing with energy as it worked to decrypt the lock. Thorn carefully positioned the scalpel and activated it, severing the device's main control circuit. On the monitoring system, they watched as the Zgok raiders outside the door chittered in frustrated communication, then moved away, presumably to seek easier targets. Junior researcher Trezke, who had been observing Thorn's actions through the laboratory security feed, whispered to his colleague, "That was not standard medical procedure." His colleague, still staring at the feed, showing Thorn calmly returning the laser scalpel to his kit, could only nod in stunned agreement. The relative calm was shattered by a station-wide emergency broadcast. Critical breach on Level 1. Main Zgok force entering through primary research hub. All security personnel compromised or non-responsive. Thorn's expression remained impassive, but his eyes narrowed slightly as he processed this information. "They're using standard swarm tactics," he murmured, almost to himself. "Flank and overwhelm." He turned to the frightened scientists. "We need to move. This position is no longer secure." "Move where?" demanded Vixtal. "You heard the announcement. They've breached the primary hub. There is nowhere to go." "The xenobiology lab on Level 2, Thorn replied without hesitation. "It has independent environmental controls and containment protocols designed for the most hazardous specimens. More importantly, it contains samples of the native toxic flora that the Zgok are likely unfamiliar with." When several of the scientists began to argue, Thorn cut them off with a sharp gesture. "This is not a debate. We have approximately 8 minutes before they locate this position and bring enough force to breach it. Those who wish to survive will follow me." Without waiting for consensus, Thorn moved to the laboratory's secondary exit, a maintenance passage that connected to the station's central vertical shaft. Using his medical override codes, he accessed the emergency protocols and began creating a path through the station's automated systems. Remarkably, every scientist chose to follow him. As they moved through the maintenance tunnels, the sounds of battle echoed through the station structure, energy weapons discharging, the chittering communication of Zgok raiders, and occasionally the screams of station personnel. Thorn led the group with unflinching focus, navigating the complex network of passages with surprising familiarity for someone who had been stationed there only 6 months. They encountered their first direct conflict 3 junctions from their destination. 2 Zgok scouts emerged from a side passage, immediately raising their weapons upon spotting the fleeing scientists. Before anyone could react, Thorn had already moved, stepping in front of the group and reaching for his medical kit. With a fluid motion that spoke of extensive training, he extracted 2 auto-injectors and hurled them with precision at the Zgok. The devices struck the raiders' exoskeletons and immediately deployed their needles, injecting a powerful sedative directly into their circulatory systems. The Zgok stumbled, their neural functions rapidly shutting down as the medication took effect. Thorn quickly checked that they were incapacitated, then motioned for the group to continue. As they passed the unconscious raiders, senior researcher Vixtal stared at Thorn with new understanding and growing alarm. "You've done this before," he stated, not a question, but a realization. Thorn met his gaze briefly. Yes. No further explanation was offered, and none was requested as they continued their journey through the station's maintenance arteries. When they finally reached the xenobiology lab on level 2, they found it already occupied, but not by Zgok. A group of Florian botanists had taken shelter there, barricading the main entrance with laboratory equipment. Their leaf-like appendages trembled with relief as they admitted Thorn's group. "The Zgok breached our primary research area," explained Chief Botanist Florix, spore emissions carrying undertones of lingering terror. "We barely escaped. They seem particularly interested in our research data." Thorn nodded, immediately moving to secure the laboratory's secondary entrance. "They're not just raiders," he stated as he worked. "This is a targeted operation. They want your research on the local flora, probably the toxic varieties that could be weaponized." The statement hung in the air, revealing an insight that seemed beyond the purview of a simple medical officer. With the laboratory secured, Thorn accessed the station's monitoring system, pulling up a schematic display of Zgok movements throughout the facility. The pattern was clear. They were systematically downloading research data and collecting samples from specific laboratories, focusing on those dealing with toxic plant compounds and their effects on various species. "They're being unusually thorough," Thorn observed. "This isn't a standard raid. It's a directed acquisition mission." Chief Botanist Florix approached, watching the tactical display with growing concern. "Our primary research involves compounds that could potentially be adapted into neurological agents. In the wrong hands." "I understand," Thorn interrupted, his mind already calculating options. His gaze shifted to the laboratory's specimen storage area, where samples of the moon's most toxic plant species were kept in environmentally controlled chambers. "Show me your most recently documented toxin," he requested, preferably one with respiratory vector capabilities. Florix hesitated only briefly before leading Thorn to a secured containment unit. Inside, a luminescent blue-green fungoid organism pulsed gently. "Specimen XB 427, Florix explained. "It produces airborne spores that cause temporary paralysis in most vertebrate species by binding to acetylcholine receptors. We've been studying it as a potential non-lethal pacification agent for riot control." Thorn studied the specimen, then turned to the laboratory's equipment. "I need access to your aerosol distribution system and a sample of Zgok biological material." When the Florian scientists looked confused, Thorn clarified, from the incapacitated scouts, "I need to test this organism's effectiveness against Zgok physiology and modify it if necessary." Understanding dawned on Florix's features. "You intend to weaponize our research?" "I intend to use it to save lives," Thorn corrected, his voice neutral, but carrying an unmistakable note of authority. "Unless you have a better suggestion for dealing with a station full of hostile raiders." No alternatives were offered. Working with efficiency that belied his supposed role as a general practitioner, Thorn extracted samples from the fungoid organism and began testing them against the biological material retrieved from the unconscious Zgok scouts. Using the laboratory's advanced analytical equipment, he identified the specific neurological vulnerabilities in Zgok physiology and modified the fungal spores to target them more effectively. Within 40 minutes, he had created a concentrated aerosol delivery system calibrated specifically to Zgok respiratory biology. As he finished, the laboratory's monitoring system pinged with an alert, Zgok signatures approaching their location. "They've found us," announced Vix Tal, anxiety evident in his usually controlled voice. Thorn nodded, completing the final adjustments to his improvised weapon. Right on schedule. They're being methodical, working through each laboratory systematically. The looks of confusion on the faces of the Cthar and Florian scientists prompted Thorn to explain further. "I've been tracking their search pattern through the monitoring system. They're following standard military grid search protocols." Before anyone could question how a medical officer would recognize military search patterns, the main laboratory door shuttered under a heavy impact. The Zgok had begun their attempt to breach the entrance. Thorn quickly outlined his plan to the gathered scientists. The modified fungal agent would be deployed through the laboratory's ventilation system when the Zgok breached the door, theoretically incapacitating the first wave of attackers. However, Thorn anticipated that their leader would be equipped with advanced respiratory protection. "I'll deal with the leader personally," he stated, making final preparations to the delivery system. "When I give the signal, release the agent and then seal yourselves in the inner containment chamber." The door groaned again, the reinforced metal beginning to buckle under the sustained assault. Through the mounting gaps, they caught glimpses of the Zgok force. At least a dozen raiders led by a massive specimen, its exoskeleton adorned with what appeared to be military insignia and advanced tactical equipment. "That's their commander," Thorn observed, his voice dropping to a clinical detachment that sent shivers through the listening scientists. "Notice the modified exoskeleton and enhanced sensory apparatus. Veteran warrior caste." The door gave way with a final screech of protesting metal. As the Zgok force began to pour through the opening, Thorn activated the ventilation system, flooding the laboratory's outer chamber with the modified fungal spores. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The frontline Zgok stumbled, their coordinated movements dissolving into uncoordinated twitching as the neurotoxin took effect. As predicted, the Zgok commander remained functional, protected by an advanced filtration system integrated into its exoskeleton. It charged forward, mandibles clicking in fury as it targeted Thorn, seemingly recognizing him as the primary threat. "Now!" Thorn shouted to the scientists, who retreated to the inner chamber and sealed its reinforced door behind them. What they witnessed next through the chamber's observation window would forever change their perception of human medical practitioners. Thorn moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for his species, evading the commander's initial charge with a precise sidestep that positioned him behind the massive insectoid. From his medical kit, he extracted what appeared to be a standard bone-setting tool. But as he activated it, the device emitted a focused sonic pulse that targeted the joining between the commander's thorax and abdominal segments, a vulnerability Thorn had identified during his earlier analysis. The Zgok commander chittered in pain, whirling to face Thorn with surprising speed despite its bulk. It deployed a secondary weapon, a neurotoxin injector designed for close combat. Thorn narrowly avoided the strike, the injector grazing his arm and tearing the fabric of his medical uniform. Unfazed, Thorn continued his calculated movement pattern, drawing the Zgok commander toward a specific section of the laboratory where he had positioned equipment earlier. As the commander charged again, Thorn activated a laboratory decontamination shower, dousing the area with a caustic cleaning solution that reacted violently with the commander's exoskeleton. The Zgok shrieked, a high-pitched sound that penetrated the inner chamber's soundproofing. Its outer armor began to smoke and bubble where the solution had made contact. Taking advantage of the momentary distraction, Thorn deployed his modified fungal agent directly into the damaged sections of the commander's exoskeleton, bypassing its respiratory protection. The effect was dramatic. The Zgok commander convulsed, its massive form collapsing as the targeted neurotoxin shut down its motor functions. Within seconds, It lay immobile on the laboratory floor, compound eyes still alert but body completely paralyzed. In the sudden silence, Thorne stood amid the fallen Skok raiders, his white medical uniform now splashed with the greenish ichor that served as their blood. His breathing was controlled, barely elevated despite the intensity of the confrontation. Methodically, he checked each incapacitated Skok, confirming their status and ensuring none remained a threat. Only then did he signal for the scientists to emerge from the inner chamber. They filed out cautiously, eyes wide as they took in the scene of devastation. Dr. Thorne, supposedly just a medical officer, stood surrounded by fallen enemies, his uniform stained with their blood. Yet his demeanor remained as clinically detached as if he were performing a routine examination. Without acknowledging their shocked stares, Thorne knelt beside one of the fallen Florian scientists who had been injured during the initial breach. With the same hands that had just incapacitated a dozen armed raiders, he now gently assessed wounds, applied pressure to stem bleeding, and administered pain medication with perfect precision. The contrast was jarring, from warrior to healer in an instant, with no apparent transition between the two roles. As Thorne moved from one injured scientist to another, his focus absolute, Administrator Kel Vash found his voice. "What? Who are you?" Thorne continued working as he responded, his tone matter-of-fact. "I told you when I arrived. I'm a medical officer. Medical officers don't neutralize armed raiders with modified medical equipment," countered Vixtal, finding courage in numbers. They don't recognize military search patterns or identify warrior castes by their exoskeletal modifications. Thorne finished bandaging a Cathar researcher's lacerated arm before responding. "Human medical training is more comprehensive than you assumed." Before further questions could be pressed, the station's communications system crackled to life with a welcome sound of a consortium security vessel announcing their arrival and the retreat of the remaining Skok forces. In the aftermath, as consortium security forces secured the station and began processing the incapacitated Skok raiders, Dr. Thorne continued his medical duties without comment on his earlier actions. He moved from patient to patient, treating injuries with the same quiet efficiency he had displayed since his arrival. It was only after the most critically injured had been stabilized that consortium intelligence officers arrived to begin their investigation. When they reached the xenobiology laboratory, their demeanor toward Dr. Thorne shifted noticeably upon reviewing the security footage. "Dr. Thorne," said the lead investigator, a Tellurian with cybernetic enhancements, "I believe we need to review your personnel file." The file, when accessed with high-level security clearance, revealed what the station staff had never been told. Dr. Eris Thorne had served for 15 years in the United Earth Battlefield Medical Corps, with multiple commendations for actions in high-risk conflict zones. His specializations included tactical medicine, advanced trauma response, and hostile environment survival, terms that now carried entirely new meaning to the Cathar administrators. Further investigation revealed that the routine physical conditioning Thorne conducted in his quarters included combat readiness exercises. The outdated medical tools in his personal kit were, in fact, specialized battlefield implements designed to function in environments where standard medical technology might be compromised. When questioned during the official debriefing, Thorne's explanation was characteristically concise. "My primary objective is always to preserve life. Sometimes that requires neutralizing threats before healing can begin. This is standard procedure in battlefield medicine." He offered no apology for his actions, nor did he attempt to justify them beyond their practical necessity. In the months that followed, the relationship between Dr. Thorne and the remaining staff of Xylos 7 underwent a profound transformation. The dismissive attitudes vanished, replaced by a careful respect tinged with lingering apprehension. Cathar scientists who had once questioned his primitive medical techniques now attentively followed his recommendations regarding emergency preparedness and trauma response protocols. The Florians, with their sensitivity to biochemical signatures, reported that Thorne's patterns remained unchanged, the same disciplined control he had always maintained. This consistency, once perceived as unnatural, was now understood as the product of rigorous training and experience in environments far more chaotic than a research station. The consortium's scientific division updated its security protocols for remote outposts, quietly incorporating principles of what they termed proactive preventative medicine that Thorne had demonstrated. They also reassessed their biases regarding species with less advanced technological development, recognizing that technological sophistication and practical effectiveness were not always synonymous. 6 weeks after the incident, the rebuilt medical bay of Xylos 7 was once again under Dr. Thorne's methodical care. He was calibrating a diagnostic scanner when junior researcher Trazke entered for a scheduled health assessment. The young Kthar's eyes flickered briefly over Thorne's immaculately maintained equipment and spotless white uniform. No trace remained of the blood-spattered figure who had stood amid fallen enemies. Yet the image persisted in Trazke's memory, impossible to reconcile with the quiet medical practitioner before him. "Your cardiac readings show slight elevation," Thorne noted, reviewing the scanner results. "Have you been maintaining adequate hydration during your research shifts?" "Yes, Dr. Thorne," Trazke replied, then hesitated before adding, "The consortium has approved our request for enhanced security measures. A defense specialist will be joining the station next month." Thorne nodded, making a notation in Trazke's medical file. A practical decision. Trazke studied the human's face, searching for some reaction beyond professional interest. "They've also requested that you provide input on the implementation of emergency medical protocols." At this, Thorne looked up from his tablet, meeting the Kthar's gaze. Something flickered behind his eyes, not pride or satisfaction, but a deep understanding of the harsh realities that existed beyond the station's pristine walls. "I'll review their proposal," he said simply, then returned to his examination. As Trazke left the medical bay, he reflected that perhaps the most unsettling aspect of Dr. Thorne was not what they had discovered about him, but what remained unknown. The calm, efficient medical officer who had saved countless lives during the attack was neither a facade nor the complete truth, merely one facet of a being shaped by experiences the sheltered scientists of Xylos 7 could barely imagine. For humans like Thorne, medicine was not merely about healing. It was about survival at any cost. And in the vast, often hostile expanse of space, that distinction made all the difference.